The Spin-off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai, hoki mai, kia The Fold. E mihi ne, ko Duncan Grieve tōku ingoa. My guest today is Jim Mather, who, man, he's a lot of things. I was really excited about this one and have wanted to have Jim on the podcast for a while. He comes as a guest of our sponsor, O Media, so I'm really grateful to them for facilitating that. So Jim has had this kind of extraordinary career. There's absolutely no one like him in media. He had 6 years in the military, chartered accountant, so has that bearing, has the kind of discipline and focus that you would associate with that kind of background, and yet has a huge passion for media and for journalism in particular, and so was sort of drawn into that world. And I think that's why he's so respected and has thrived in it, is because there are naturally in this business a lot of sort of chaotic, highly strung, wound pretty tight personalities in it, and you need that. That's why this thing kind of crackles and pops, but it also really requires someone to kind of be able to put that into a logical order and protect what needs protecting, but also restrain what can actually endanger the whole enterprise. And you can just sort of feel radiating out of Jim that he is just really, really well designed to resolve those tensions, I suppose. So he was the second chief executive of Māori television, Whakaata Māori, and came into the role when it was in a really perilous state. It had a disastrous CE and John Davey, who had forged his CV and ended up, I think, going to prison out the back of that. And it was just a very fledgling thing. Like I think it's not an exaggeration to say that had he not done such a great job as chief executive of that organisation, it may not have survived and thrived the way it has. So we talk a lot about those early days and how you resolve the tensions that are kind of natural and specific to a Māori media organisation, and then traverse into his role in governance, particularly with RNZ, and which he came on board as chair in 2018, so he's been there for 5 years, and these have not been 5 chill years for RNZ by any means. And if you listen to Gavin Morris's podcast a few weeks ago, where he talked about the ABC's journey, I think a lot of what you hear Jim talking about aspiring to do is what Gavin achieved, but it just hasn't been easy. Basically, between the government and some very loud and opinionated stakeholders and COVID and a whole bunch of things, RNZ really has been kind of had its hands tied behind its back in terms of how it can approach those things. So those are the two big themes of the podcast. We also talk about the media he consumed growing up and how the media environment has changed over the decades that he has been first observing it and then working in and around it. So it's a really interesting pod, I think. I always love talking to people who've been around, seen and done some things and can reflect on all that, and this is absolutely one of those. So this is Jim Mather, Chair of RNZ, on The Fold. Tēnā koe, Jim, and welcome to The Fold.
Tēnā koe, Duncan, tino haru koe ki te haramai ki konei. Very happy to be here.
Kia ora. I wonder if you could start by explaining how you came to be involved in the media. Were you always an avid consumer of it growing up?
I was an avid consumer of it, and that was probably the extent of my expertise. But I was very fortunate in that I had the opportunity in 2004 to put my application forward for the chief executive role at what was then referred to as Māori Television, now Whakaata Māori, and very surprisingly, I went through the process and was selected as their foundation chief executive.
I mean, and I want to sort of drill into that because it's a really interesting institution and also one which, now like all of the sort of traditional media has challenges and opportunities in front of it. But the thing that is interesting to me is why, with your background in the military and as a chartered accountant, those are very kind of precise, orderly institutions or professions, and media is by its very nature much more chaotic. I just wondered, I sort of, you would profile like someone who would look at it and go, absolutely not. But you sort of dove right in. What drew you to that institution at that time?
Well, if I can go back to my childhood, Duncan, I grew up with my grandparents for a period of time in a small town called Titeko, which is between Whakatane and Kawerau. And they were part of that generation that really were challenged by the times that they lived in. And I can remember my koro, my grandfather, once when I was on leave from the military, I went to visit him, and he told me that he was so uplifted by what he had just seen on TV, and this was 1983. And so I inquired what it was, and he talked about how a new program called Te Karere had just started. And for 5 minutes, he listened to a young gentleman called Derek Fox talk in Te Reo Māori about the current affairs of the day. And he was just so astounded that such a thing could occur in New Zealand, particularly on primetime television. And so I also held that with me, the low expectation that he had, but the high sense of aroha that had come through just hearing our language and our culture being referred to. And so I often thought about what he and his generation would think about a Māori television channels dedicated to kaupapa Māori themes, and came to the conclusion he'd be completely blown away by it all. And so that was part of my motivation for putting my application forward. But I definitely was a left field candidate that probably wasn't expected to go through the process, let alone be successful. But going back to your question about my background at that time, I'd spent 6 years in the military, learnt a lot about leadership from a lot of veteran campaigners. I'd been an accountant and a general manager in the private sector. And I think the context of Māori television in 2004 was they were in quite a dysfunctional state. They had quite a controversy around the appointment of John Davey, who was subsequently terminated due to issues with his CV, as we probably all remember. And also there was an element of lack of discipline and sense of direction within the organisation. So that's probably why I was considered, and as somebody who could possibly bring a much clearer sense of kotahitanga or unity and direction to the organisation.
So when you come into Whakaata Māori, the John Davey thing has been a huge national news story. It's a fragile and fledgling organisation, which unavoidably was part of the news itself in terms of the John Davey affair. How did you go about kind of establishing what its function and role and relationship with its audience was, and what was the sort of the feeling in those rooms at the time?
At that time, 2004, Māori television was in quite a tenuous state. The concern about it was that it would not be able to function independently. There was discussion about folding it into TVNZ, and there was a clear set of incompatible dynamics within Māori television. Basically, you had a large cohort of young Māori who had a strong level of activism for the language and culture. My wife, Annabelle, was definitely part of that group, and at that time, and there was also a group of more experienced broadcasters that had come through the ranks at TVNZ. You also, along with those groups, had the Māori language proponents who saw Māori television having the sole purpose of broadcasting programming in Te Reo Māori and being quite exclusive to Māori themselves. And in the background was a group of kaumātua queer and koroua that had fought for the establishment of Māori television. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics, and there wasn't a lot of professional management expertise, which is probably why I was appointed to the role. And what occurred to make sure that Māori television launched, because there had been several delays in its launch, was that they brought in an experienced Māori businessman called Wayne Walden, who'd run Farmers Deck and done very well there, and a board of other professionals such as Gary Muruwai, who was the chief executive of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. And they said, well, first and foremost, we've got a business that we need to set up and structure and get right. So obviously my background aligned with that trajectory. And so the big challenge was giving everybody a sense of unity and kotahitanga, unified sense of purpose. And to that end, what I did recognise when I arrived was that, and I wasn't skilled in any way in Te Reo Māori, so I didn't have a strong level of credibility with the Māori language proponents. I also had zero background in media, apart from consuming a lot of it and having my own views. And so the challenge was recognising that everybody wanted Māori television to succeed, but there was a whole disparate set of views about what the best pathway was. So how that all got reconciled was that we had a group of elders called a kauni, had a kaumātua, a council of elders, and one of the leaders on that council was a gentleman called Hurangi Waikirepuru, and Hurangi had literally mortgaged his house to challenge the New Zealand government about the recognition of Te Reo Māori as a taonga, which wasn't confirmed by the New Zealand government, so he took a court case to the Privy Council in England and financed it personally, along with others in a group called Ngā Kaiwhakapumo o Te Reo Māori, the strong supporters of the Māori language. So it was a group of Māori language activists that really challenged the government, and the Privy Council's ruling was that they encouraged New Zealand government to revisit the status of Te Reo Māori, which eventually led to Māori television being established. So I invited Hurangi to talk to the people of Māori television and to remind them of the challenges that his generation had gone through. And he said in no uncertain terms, we worked hard for this to happen. Don't stuff it up with your own agendas, and be focused on what we're trying to do here, which was to be a world-class Indigenous broadcaster, and recognising we weren't doing something unique just down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but it was part of a worldwide movement of revitalisation of Indigenous languages. So Hurangi, I think, can also be credited to giving everybody a strong sense of unity and direction.
And that's one of the beauties of television in some respects, is that by the very nature of just lining up different programs, you can actually, not on any individual program, but over the course of programming out a a day, a week, a month, a year represent different perspectives or different approaches to the same issues, right? One of the things that has sort of, strikes me in some respects is, and is, it feels like it's perpetually a tension is how you practice journalism at an organisation like Whakaata Māori, where, you have a part of the fundamental role is revitalisation of the language and giving an alternate perspective on Te Ao Māori, but there's also journalism, and there has been some fantastic journalism, some done by Annabelle, which will naturally come into conflict with some people within those worlds. How did you, coming from the outside, sort of manage that some of those tensions that exist?
Along with being appointed chief executive, I also had the lofty title of editor-in-chief, and I didn't quite understand at that time what it actually meant or what the responsibilities were. But I took journalism very seriously. I'm a believer that holding power to account and giving voice to those that don't have a loud hailer, who are often from the underserved parts of our communities, is critically important and an important part of the role of media. And so I was very respectful of the profession of journalism and felt that it was a critical part of the fabric of our society. And also it was incumbent upon journalists to challenge the status quo and to explore the underlying rationale for decisions made and to seek out the actual truth. And so I was very aligned with those journalistic ethics. And to that end, I also felt that we were obligated to also apply those standards to our own Māori institutions and entities and hold our own people to account to their various constituents. And so one of the programs I was most proud of during my time at Māori Television was Native Affairs, which was quite groundbreaking in many ways. Even the title was quite controversial when we were thinking through what the name of the program would be. And to that end, the investigative journalism element was really quite important, and there were some great stories that came to the fore that made our people, Māori, reflect on the way our important institutions were being led and question some aspects of the leadership styles or models that were being employed. But it also attracted the interest of mainstream New Zealand into seeing that we were prepared to hold ourselves accountable. So journalism, I believe then and still do, is a critical part of any democracy and the way that our communities inject more equity into the way things are done.
Did you find, because there would be some of those institutions might not like being investigated, and I can think of some examples of that, and might have viewed the very fact of it happening within Māori television as something which could create issues with them outside of Te Ao Māori and in terms of the way that they interact with broader parts of New Zealand society. How did you go about sort of protecting, because you need to create an environment where that kind of journalism can be practiced with integrity and allow them to operate with the kind of fearlessness that Annabelle and Mihi were sort of, remain famous for, for you as editor-in-chief, acting as a bulwark between those institutions and that, small, fierce team. How did you kind of go about that, and how important was that, do you think, over that period?
Well, I think it was critical to have the trust and confidence of the journalists that they were going to be allowed to practice their profession unimpeded in terms of the journalistic integrity being maintained throughout. I was very fortunate that in the legislation for the Māori television service there was a clause on editorial independence, and so politicians of the day, even the boards, were constrained from delving into editorial decisions that were made. And so my statement to our journalists was that you will have the air cover you need to undertake the investigations that are required of our institutions. And there was a lot of pushback from the board, many of whom struggled with the integration of journalism with tikanga Māori, and I, on a number of occasions, found myself having to defend the importance of journalism. Also, within Te Ao Māori, there's a concept called rangatira ki te rangatira, chiefs to chiefs, and so many senior rangatira within Te Ao Māori felt that they could just go directly to the board and get things modified in a way that aligned with their views, and so I was very clear about that not being appropriate, and made myself unpopular in some quarters, but it's not a popularity contest. It's about getting the right results, and for those that are seeking to expose the truth or to provide insights into it, it's important they know that their Indigenous television media organisation is going to demonstrate courage when required.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
And that leads quite well into the sort of next phase of your career, which was very much around governance. And I feel like what you're describing in some ways is a crash course in how to properly defend the appropriate way for governance to be practiced within media, which I'm sure has been helpful with your role as chair of RNZ, for example. What led you there, and how has your experience with Māori television helped you in this that sphere that you now move in fairly exclusively now?
The Māori television experience really embedded a love within me for media and the importance of media, particularly Indigenous and public media. And so I carried that through with me during my time. I went from Māori television after 9 years as CEO to Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, our nation's second largest tertiary institution, and was there for 5 years and enjoyed many aspects of the tertiary education sector. However, my primary passion was in media, so I was very pleased that when I concluded my modest executive career in 2018, that I was given the opportunity to apply for the RNZ chair role. And once again, like the Māori television experience, I was very pleasantly surprised to go through that successfully and be appointed. I believe that governance is a realm that is very supportive of chief executives transitioning to the other side of the board table, because they tend to have seen governance in all shapes and sizes, and good governance and not so good governance, or if you're unfortunate, some terrible governance. And so you sort of take those experiences into your own governance career, and you've got much more empathy and insights to the challenges that management teams have. So it was a natural transition, if I could just say that, Duncan. But I love the concept of going to Te Reo Irirangi or Aotearoa Radio New Zealand, finding out more about how a public media entity that was moving into digital in a significant way operated, and just coming back into that sphere. So it's been an interesting and insightful ride.
I mean, it's interesting that you note that, because, and this exists as a challenge for public media in New Zealand, and obviously the media merger, which has just been abandoned, was part of the proposed solution to it. But part of the mandate that allows public media to exist is this idea that it is for everybody, but which was a relatively simple thing. If you had a frequency or a channel 20 or so years ago, now it's incredibly complex. And one of the roles of a board, perhaps one of its most important role, is kind of setting strategic direction and allowing an organisation to navigate through changing environments. How have you found that role, and how would you judge the success of RNZ in turning to kind of basically maintaining its existing work streams and audiences and programming, while also attempting to create opportunities for different generations and demographics of New Zealander to engage with its content and its purpose?
RNZ is 98 years old this year, and it was launched in conjunction with a AM transmitter tower being unveiled by Michael Joseph Savage in 1925 in Titahi Bay. And I only mention that because heritage and history and whakapapa is really important. So in 2 years, we're going to be celebrating the centenary of RNZ. And to me, it's really important to think that your best days are still ahead of you, and to reflect on what has worked very well, but to realise you've got to adapt and you've got to change. And that brings me to my key point, that relevance is really important. Public media needs to be relevant to be effective, and I challenge my colleagues at RNZ about our name, Radio New Zealand, and for us to, similar to TVNZ, I suppose, Television New Zealand, to be true to that, we've actually got to be relevant to as many New Zealanders as possible, and in that process try and endeavour to create relationships and ideally lifelong relationships with all New Zealanders where they come to RNZ for their range of media requirements. And so the simple mantra I have and other board members have is that RNZ needs to be as relevant for the factory worker living in Otara as it does for the retired public servant living in Kilburnie. So that's a big challenge. That's
a big challenge.
It certainly is, particularly when your audience has been traditionally conservative, older, and very Wellington-centric. And so that's what we're working on, making ourselves more relevant to what's termed underserved communities, our many ethnic communities, particularly our Māori and Pasifika communities as well. But it's not just about ethnicity; it's about our demographics and age ranges as well. And it's most board members would see the conundrum here. You get a group of typically 50 plus age New Zealanders are talking about what young audiences want. We wouldn't have a clue. It's been a long time since we were young people, and so you've really got to have more diversity on your boards, more voices that can be heard, and the like. So I think there's some interesting challenges because we want to be relevant to as many New Zealanders as possible, but the reality is no one media organisation can be everything to everyone, and that's why you need a range of media options. So I'm very respectful of what you and the team have done here at the Spin-Off, because I know that there's a specific audience that is completely aligned with the content and products and services that you're producing. And I think we need to look at the media ecosystem as being a range of providers that can meet specific needs and being relevant.
It's interesting, right? Because what you describe is absolutely the challenge for RNZ. And I had Gavin Morris, who was the Director of News and Innovation at the ABC, really and drove a lot of change there. And one of the things that he was absolutely unapologetic about was that part of digitally transforming a public media institution like the ABC or RNZ is actually saying goodbye to some things that you love to do and that your audience might love, but that just you can't do everything. And that sense of having to sacrifice those things and take the blast is part of it. But RNZ is really interesting and in some ways is constrained by the fact that it has tried to do things. And sometimes I think we forget that there was an attempt to move from RNZ Concert and make that into a more youth-focused brand, which has now become Tahi, but without a sort of centrifying force, it's always going to struggle. So that idea that you could meet both that sort of conservative, older Wellingtonian and the factory worker from Otara, do you believe that the organisation as of today, March 2023, is achieving that? And if not, how confident are you that, when you next try and make a change, that you'll be because the political will has to be there, which is what ultimately quashed the RNZ Concert move.
Yeah, I think to use that overused metaphor, it's a journey, and we're on that journey, and so acknowledging that we haven't arrived at the destination we want to be at in terms of being relevant to non-traditional audiences, and so that's really important for us, Duncan, to not lose sight of the wider strategy that we are trying to effectively implement, because the status quo is not sustainable, and it's the business models for many media organisations are rapidly changing because the expectations are changing around us, and 10 years ago, very few of us knew what a streaming service was, and now we probably subscribe to 2, 3 or more type thing, and certainly we know from talking to our very entitled children in this day and age that they have no concept of what appointment viewing is for the most part, and certainly have no idea what being home at 7 o'clock to watch the news and to be updated on what's happened in the world. It's just a concept that they find completely foreign. So I think those organisations that can adapt and adapt effectively are going to survive and prosper. Those that don't are going to struggle. And so taking that mantra back to RNZ, we know we need to adapt, and having a largely older conservative audience, whilst we're hugely respectful and and appreciative of that level of support, we know that we've got to adapt to the changing requirements of other sectors of our society.
I mean, in some respects, does the clarity of the merger being put in the ground a month or so ago at least give you a sense of purpose and a knowledge that this is your job and no one else's now? Like, what was your perspective on the merger, and how fast do you think? Because that obviously naturally pauses or distracts work on strategy development and execution. Now that were you in favour of it, and now that it's gone, do you think that RNZ can perhaps move more quickly to address some of those absences that you're describing?
Perhaps if I start by responding to your question, Duncan, with a Māori proverb or whakatauki, which is ka mate kāinga tahi, ka ora kāinga rua, which basically means when the first house falls, you move on to the next one. So in tikanga Māori, there isn't a lot of time spent dwelling on things that have fallen by the wayside. You just need to get on with things and move on to the next iteration of what you're attempting to achieve. So for us, the board of RNZ, senior management, we are very committed to public media, and we saw that the proposed new public media entity encapsulated those important elements of public media, high quality journalism, focus on local reporting, holding power to account, and so on and so forth. And so it was a natural opportunity for us to see that this could be, in terms of that constant adaptation, that could be a significant and important next step in the development of Radio New Zealand. And so now that the decision has been made not to proceed with it, our view is there was a lot of important insights and things that were identified about collaboration with TVNZ and private media, and how do we make it work, even though the much broader public media strategy was discontinued. What are the things that we can take from that and to make RNZ more relevant and a much stronger public media entity? And that's where our focus is, just looking through, what were the key learnings from that whole exercise. And it was something that went over several years, right, starting from the business case, and I think the logical business reasons were lost in the whole process, and they weren't as strongly articulated as they could have been, because there was some very strong business reasons for doing this, and it wasn't just about esoteric public media aspirations. But all of that said, we are where we are, and we're now moving on to building the next whare.
So just finally on that point, one of the things that, and I mentioned this before, but that, part of the everyone pays for public media, therefore everyone should feel like there is public media for them. And sometimes I think that older conservative audience, because they're being well served, can sort of feel like, well, it's there if anyone else wants it, which I think, as we move into this era where people are increasingly sort of selecting their own media, and particularly younger audiences, that describing your children's habits, if they're anything like mine, the total quantity of media which is created here in Aotearoa versus made from anywhere else, I just think that you could never know the ratios, but you could guess, and it would be quite scary. Do you believe that it is sort of that this is actually an existentially important question, that unless you can show and prove that those bigger, diverse audiences are actively consuming RNZ's content, that some of the mandate that allows you to exist, that bond between audience, public, and the state, that starts to become unstable if over a prolonged period of time you cannot create work which impacts them and is actively consumed?
Yeah, absolutely. Audiences are paramount, obviously, and to be able to demonstrate the value that you provide based on the investment that's been made, you've got to be able to reach significant audiences if you're a national media entity like RNZ. However, I will state that I've not been someone, even in my executive media career, that slavishly looked at ratings and saw that as the key success measurement. And often I say to my colleagues at RNZ, what I'm most focused on is the trust metric. How much are we trusted by our fellow New Zealanders? Do they see us as a trusted source of news, current affairs, and journalism in general? So I think the trust factor's got to be incorporated as well into the ways that we not only measure our success but demonstrate our value. And typically that comes to the fore during periods of crisis or when we are experiencing severe weather events, for example, during the pandemic, and other types of highly abnormal situations where it's not about entertainment anymore. It's about trusted information that we know we can go to a source such as RNZ and get it there. So I think that's another measurement of value that's provided. One could argue trust is very subjective, and how do you measure it? And we tend to look at independent organisations such as the AUT Journalism School and the independent studies they do. But for us, it's about having a significant audience, but also an audience that trusts in what we disseminate.
So part of the reason that we're chatting today is because you have a connection to oOh!media, which is the presenting sponsor of this podcast. And I remember I had Nick Bile, the GM of oOh!, on this, and he spoke quite insightfully about the way that that organisation has engaged with you and is attempting to figure out a way for what is fundamentally out-of-home advertising. And you could imagine that until fairly recently they wouldn't have even considered the relationship to Te Ao Māori or to mana whenua to be of particular import. But it does feel like it's something that's kind of got its hooks into him and to the organisation. Do you want to just talk a bit about that engagement and about how with your consultancy hat on, you've been, you've engaged with different media organisations and got them to kind of come along on the journey to a more kind of fully realised sense of partnership?
Certainly. Well, since 2018 and moving from my final executive role, I was always committed to being part of a process of connecting mainstream governance with Māori governance, and being an interface or a conduit to demystify, to translate, to explain some of the core differences in that area. So my own humble Māori development consultancy called Mather Solutions, and has been operating that space, working with a number of central government clients, local government organisations such as Auckland Unlimited, and Crown entities such as the ACC and EQC, the Earthquake Commission. However, what we've noticed over the last 2 years is that there's been virtually a tsunami of interest from private sector entities that are saying we need to better understand the Māori economy, Māori businesses, Māori governance. We need to understand why this is actually important. And to give you an example, we're working with a large facilities management organisation that have been cleaning Ministry of Education buildings for decades, and they had one of their long-term contracts at risk because they were asked what their position was on Te Tiriti o Waitangi and what their cultural competency levels were. And so and they have just seen a different set of expectations now, particularly from government businesses they're working with, organisations, I should say. So bringing this back to oOh!media, oOh!media is going through a similar process of wanting to more strongly identify the unique heritage of New Zealand in their organisation. They deal with mana whenua entities. They are being asked to be able to demonstrate their cultural capability, depth, understanding, and generally credentials. But I also think that within the organisation, there's a desire to just be a great New Zealand business and to understand what that actually means, and to be prepared to challenge themselves in going to realms that would not normally be an area of comfort for them. So they also have something that I never take for granted with any client, and that's they have a willingness to do the right thing. And some people are rather cynical about it, but I think it's almost a prerequisite. If you're going to do something, do it with authenticity, with commitment, with genuine intent, and that's what I see with the people at oOh!media.
Yeah, you know it when you see it.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on The Fold today, Jim. You've got such an amazingly varied and career, and the views that you have in these organisations is fascinating. So yeah, really appreciate you coming out.
Kia ora, Duncan. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Kia ora. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Talofa Lover. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.